Alright, we've drilled down on the verminous horde of the Skaven's Regiments of Renown, from the Clan Vulcan's Tail Slashers to the Doomwheels, but that's just one side of two coins, or two sides, or the same coin. That's the saying, that's it. I should really work on my fucking axioms. But the Lizardmen are filled with just as many delicious little lore nuggets in their wide range of Regiments of Renown. Most things are rather obscure, such as the Umbral Tide or the Colossadon Hunters, with others that have references to the end times or nods to other characters, such as the Star Chamber Guardians giving their nod to Chacox. So let's get into some lizard goodness and sit under a hot lamp for our Iguana Bros. Our first unit will be one of the new units, the Red-Crested Skinks Regiment Renown, the Cohort of Sotech. Now, if you haven't gotten a chance to really dive in on these guys in general, they're pretty great. They're very cost-effective AP units with Frenzy, but what about the lore behind the Cohort of Sotech? Now, there isn't a very specific unit called the Cohort of Sotech, rather, it kind of reflects upon the grander lore of the Red-Crested Skinks as a whole. After the destruction of Chaqua, the Red-Crested Skinks came in droves to serve the Prophet of Sotech, 10-1. The Red Crest, a direct sign of their blessing by the Serpent God himself. The Cohort of Sotech plays heavily into that motif of the Red Host, the name of the Prophet's armies, as they kind of scoured through Lustria during the Lizardmen's era of strife. Now, I'll read a fun lore excerpt from Hokinichi, the bearer of the war banner of the Red Host. One totem was a hide cut from the back of the vile Skaven plague Pontifex Lord Queech, who was defeated by the skink chief Hokinichi at the Battle of the Golden Stair. Chief Hokinichi stripped the plague-ridden hide from the Skaven's back and mounted the vile flesh upon a pole. This he bore into battle as the army's war banner. So revolting was the stench of the decaying Skaven flesh that the entire army of the Prophet of Sotech was driven into a murderous frenzy by its very presence upon the battlefield. Many and great were the victories won by the Skinks of the Red Host beneath the Skaven Pelt banner. Now, let's get into the stats of these bad boys, because they're an absolute girthed out unit in the campaign. They should be the first thing you invest into, or invest your sacrifice points into, as they are they're super invaluable. For 250 points, you're getting a nice increase to melee defense at 27. They kind of hover over that there. A bump to your melee attack and a sizable jump in leadership, rounding it out at 100. Now, the two biggest factors is that the Cohort of Sotech is unbreakable. There it is. Which is a godsend for a skink unit, especially in early campaign, and as a great kind of fast harassment unit in competitive play. Because, they still have a speed of 46, which is quite quick. You can put them on the flank, you can get around things. In addition to that, they do have Frenzy, which is going to increase their weapon damage, charge bonus, and melee attack. I believe that is not reflected here. As soon as we press start battle, that will take effect, and as long as their leadership is above 50%. But their last ability is Refuse to Die. Now, this is a brand new mechanic with this DLC, and it's honestly really awesome. So when you pop this 20-second ability, any entities in the unit will go as low as 1 hit point, but won't die. This can keep a unit in place for long enough to get support from the rest of your army, or a massive timely heal. Couple this with the Deliverance of Itza to kind of like decimate a unit that is being tied up by the Cohort of Sotech. Moving from the Skinks to the Saurus, we have their first Regiment Renown unit in the Spear variant of the Saurus Warrior with the Legion of Chaqua. Now, this is another unit that is more inferred from the text than an actual unit with any sort of repute. Chaqua was the famed city that 10-1 once hailed from, its ancient temple city walls decked and lined with some of the most finely wrought gold in all of the old Lizardmen Empire. You can actually see that represented on these guys. You can see that they're wrought with a bunch of gold across their spines, on their shoulders, on their wrists, and their ankles and everything. So it kind of plays heavily into the motif of these units' aesthetics. It's pretty awesome. But when Chaqua fell to Clan Pestilence during the Skaven Lizardmen War, there was a vast exodus of refugees and surviving warriors that joined up with the other temple cities/armies. So of them would no doubt be Creative Assembly's home-brewed Legion of Chaqua. Now, a 300-point increase is pretty steep on a line infantry regiment Renown, but the benefits are pretty substantial here. Bring up that, there it is. First off, they get an additional 15 armor, which is pretty huge, bringing them to a lovely 75. They get 13 melee defense, 10 leadership, and 5 melee attack. So that's a massive buff to their stats. In addition to all of that, they also get another new mechanic exclusive to the Lizardmen. the Shield of Chakwa. This grants 44% missile resistance to every unit in a 40-meter radius. This is an amazing buff that can synergize so well with particular builds or used to defend high-value targets. Take, for example, 10-1 on the Engine of the Gods, with the Legion of Chakwa behind him supporting his charge. It will be substantially more difficult to snipe Lizard Moses off of his favorite Triceratops with the 44% missile resistance from the Legion of Chakwa. There it is right there. 15% missile resistance innately in his profile. 5% damage resistance from the Portent of Warding that comes on the actual Engine of the Gods itself. And lastly, 22% damage resistance from his Plaque of Sotech. Not to mention any beast spells you might bring to help with, the additional staying power of 10-1. Needless to say, the Legion synergizes awesomely with certain builds and certain ways to go about the new Lizardmen army. Since we're on the note of synergizing well, the Temple Guard's Regiment of Renown, the Star Chamber Guardians, have a lot of great abilities that also play very well with keeping your characters alive. And of course, you'll be getting the kind of standard stat line increase that you can expect with a rank 9 version of a unit, but you'll also have 51 melee defense as a result of the 13 increase over the standard Temple Guard. So for 300 more points, you're also getting access to charge defense versus all compared to just the large of the vanilla counterpart. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. Also, you'll be gaining magic damage. Get a better angle on these guys. I did this really nice map that's got this lovely, beautiful view. It's called Lord Croak's Temple. But you'll also be getting magic damage on these guys, which is great for your AP anti-large infantry unit here, that is going to be able to threaten any of the undead factions lords that get careless with their alpha strikes, or just in general, any lord that gets careless with their alpha strikes. Lastly, you get access to Guardian. Now, this is an ability that makes the absolute most sense on these fabled Guardians of the Slann, granting them 18% physical resistance to any lord or hero that is in their aura. With all that being said, there is still no direct unit called the Star Chamber Guardian in lore. Rather, it reflects on the hierarchy of the Temple Guard and a nod to the Star Chambers themselves. Star Chambers are these rooms, typically located at the top of the many pyramids that dot Lustria. There is a Slann that may meditate on the wonders of the Old Ones and glean a bit more of the great plan set out by their former masters, gaining insight into the next targets to be attacked, or how long until one can stop after popping into a Pringles can, and where more information on the Old Ones can just be found, like these plaques and other artifacts. So here's a great excerpt from the 6th edition army book. It might actually be the 7th, but it's on the Temple Guard hierarchy, and it opens up talking about how the younger spawn protect places of power while older generations guard the Slann directly. When not protecting their charge in battle, each of these Saras attends to a specific duty. The Stone Warden guards the Slann's palanquin chamber. The Sentinel of the Blessed is responsible for the safety of the temple's skink attendants. The Relic Keeper stands sentry in the temple city's vault, watching over the treasures so valued by warm-blooded thieves, whilst the Mortuary Custodian guards the most sacred relics of all, deep within the pyramid's tomb chamber, the Relic Priests. The Revered Guardians, inevitably the strongest and most savage of the Temple Guard, stand sentry at the very entrance to the inner sanctum of the Slann itself. It is the Revered Guardian, sometimes called the Master of the 22, who leads the Temple Guard in battle, and it is he alone who can grant access to the Slann Mage Priest. Highest ranked of all is the Eternity Warden, who stands at his master's side, locked inside the Star Chamber as the Slann casts his mind to the furthest reaches of the universe. You should see a card pop up in the upper right here that will link you to my video on Chacox that'll discuss more about the Eternity Wardens, but let's mix things up and move away from the infantry to talk about another one of the new units, and arguably one of the trickiest but almost most powerful units, Salamander Hunting Pack and their Regiment Renown, the Umbral Tide. So these slithering little slimy beasts got their name from a pretty noteworthy conflict in Lizardmen history, the Battle of the Umbral Tide. And I'm going to just read right from this excerpt as it's a quick one. The raiding army of Dark Elves aboard the Umbral Tide, a notorious Black Ark of Nagaroth fleet, was surprised in the Black Way by a Lizardman army. Beached by powerful spells, the city-shaped ship was swarmed over by skinks, croxagores, and salamander hunting packs that rose out of the water to clamber aboard. Although the ship's many towers launched flights of quarrels, the flame spouts of the salamanders soon silenced them, save for the cries of the hopelessly burned. Not a single dark elf survived, and the ship's massive hull remains, sticking out of the mud banks as a skeletal reminder of the fate of those who dare enter Lustria. So again, a cool nod to a cool point in history for a cool new Regiment of Renown. And for 200 points, you also get some cool perks. Well, that's enough cool for one day, I think. I want to make a joke about these guys heating things up because there's only just so much of my own cringe I can deal with here. But you get a pretty good bonus to the combat stats over the Salamander hunting pack of 6 and 9 melee attack and defense respectively. The biggest stat bump is a whopping 22 additional weapon strength on the already decimating range firepower of these guys. You also get perfect vigor, which works so well with the 70 speed on the hunting pack, enabling them to kite things quite effectively. There's perfect vigor. But these guys are going to be a breakout in the competitive meta, in my opinion, and they're really the only access you get to anti-large in the 10-1 campaign to begin with. So you've got to really learn to love these guys. The trick to using salamanders is getting either above a unit or on the flanks or rears. Their fire damage can absolutely roast infantry, and obviously it's meant really to do a ton of damage to any kind of anti-large, rat ogres, charging cavalry, anything of sort, but it can roast pretty much everything it shoots at. The biggest thing is, though, that you can really do a lot of damage to your own units, so you do have to get them in a flanking position. You have to get them above something. You can't just have them fire over your own units. They have a very shallow arc, and they will absolutely hit your own units. I promise you. Swear to God, I didn't lose a fight because I roasted half my own army with these guys. Not speaking from experience, and I'm still not mad about it. But before we close the segment on these guys, I want to talk about why they're better than their non-Regiment Renown counterpart. If we hover over the weapon strength window, we'll see the breakout of their damage. This breakdown is identical to their vanilla version for the exception of one thing. Their reload time is 14 seconds versus the standard 18 seconds. That's a huge benefit, as a lot of the new range units for both armies have a long reload time or they take a long time to set up. This makes for a much more mobile firing platform. On the note of mobility, let's talk about the new Cold One Spear Riders. Now, I wish they were the skink riding Tichi Huichi's Raiders, but they're not. The Regiment Renown version is Pak Hopak's Cohort, which I'd argue really fits the same niche that Tichi Huichi's would fit, so I'm cool with it. They really bring a lot of great utility to a hard-hitting shock cav unit. For 300 points more, you're getting a nice 11 more melee defense and 6 more melee attack. The real bread and butter, as always, are in the abilities that come with this unit. You do not have to worry about rampage on these guys at all, making them exceptionally better in prolonged combat coupled with their melee defense. Add in their immune to psychology and they'll be in it for the long haul. Lastly, they have access to Vanguard. There's immune psychology right there, and there is Vanguard, allowing you to deploy a hard counter to other skirmisher cav by getting the drop on them or using them for backline harassment against artillery pieces in both competitive and campaign. Trust me, you'll definitely want that in campaign. Holy shit. And this really it shores up something that was a big weakness in the Lizardmen army, was that kind of deployable fast cav, quote-unquote fast cav. These things are only 66 speed, so a majority of all fast cav is going to be able to outrun them, but at least you'll be in a more advantageous position that you can threaten them quickly without having to run from your starting line to wherever they are. So you do get a little bit more of a drop on them, and if you have the luck of starting on them like right on top of them, you're going to out-trade them easily. If you have anti-large, you've got AP and way better stat line. But what about their lore? Well, lucky for us, there's a direct entry from the 8th edition army book, but I get the impression this was originally a unit on foot, and I'll gladly take the adaptation here, but let's read this small excerpt and you guys can see where I got that idea that this was originally a Saurus warrior on foot unit. Then, with a shocking suddenness, the jungle came alive. The rhythmic beating of drums began as 3 separate lines of Saurus emerged to form a wall of scaled shields across the invader's path. Tenahawk could distinguish each formation: the stipple-scaled warriors under Tok Ox, the Spear Legion of Pak Hopak, and the unbeaten ancients of Scar veteran Ulchak. Rising partially out of the murky waters, Tenahawk and his patrol shot darts from their blowguns, some whirring harmlessly over their foes, others burying themselves deep into exposed flesh. Hopok is pretty lucky that it does have a complete entry, or at least something you can glean off of, because that is not the case for the Colossodon Hunters, the Regiment of Renown of the new Ripperdactyls. The entries in the 8th edition, where the Ripperdactyls first popped up, is more about their overall abilities, having not been in the game long enough to really kind of develop a well-known presence like a lot of the other units on this list. I mean, this is the first, that was the first edition they were a part of. I'll read a short excerpt here that at least sheds light on the name of this Regiment of Renown, if anything else. Those lucky enough to have witnessed a Ripperdactyl attack and survived have likened their assault to the feeding frenzies of the deadly ripperfish, a hurricane of slashing claws and stabbing beaks. Flocks have been known to swoop down upon beasts as large as Colossodons, leaving scant moments later when the carcass is picked clean of the tastiest morsels. The new Ripperdactyls are definitely a terror in the skies. You know, they have some great AP and anti-infantry, and they can shred through units at the cost of 1,200 points. Definitely more of a glass cannon than a sustained combatant, but the Colossodon Hunters take their formula and they shift it just slightly. Lizardmen have always struggled with airborne lords, having, they don't really have any strong combatants in the air until this DLC, between Tic-Tac-Toe and 10-1, both of course being able to ride Pterodon's Ripperdactyls. But also this Regiment of Renown. For 300 points additional, you get the obvious increase to melee attack and melee defense that we've come to expect, but you're shifting your 10 anti-infantry from the vanilla version to 10 anti-large for the Regiment of Renown. This, coupled with their 130 weapon strength damage, 98 being AP as you can clearly see, is going to be ferocious against any of the scarier flying lords in the meta. Keep in mind, this unit also has Frenzy, so they're going to have even higher weapon strength above 50% leadership. The big standout feature of the Regiment of Renown is the Toad Rage ability. This is a direct nod to the 8th edition rule wherein the skinks riding the Ripperdactyls would chuck a blot toad, the preferred food of the Rippers, onto the soon-to-be charged opponent. This would turn these flying piranhas into a feeding frenzy, just a fucking all-you-can-eat continental breakfast. Move over, Icket, Daddy wants himself some fucking Cheerios and applesauce. Toad Rage gives a huge bonus of 40% AP and weapon strength to the unit at the cost of rampaging them, which, if they're engaged with your preferred target, is really not too bad. Also, 10-1 can focus their instincts, or so can the red-crested skink, bringing them back from the brink. They're just a great unit to see added to the roster, and they really fill a lot of holes the roster once had. Jumping over to the less melee-centric flyers, the Cohort Sentinels are the Regiment of Renown Pterodon Riders in the new DLC. The cheapest Regiment of Renown on this list, actually. They come in at only 750 points, 150 points above their off-brand version, which really isn't too shabby. Pterodons have always struggled finding a place in the Lizardmen roster, but now they are becoming more and more appealing with the lords buffing them in campaign and their abilities being supported well by Ripperdactyls and, well, now aerial lords. You get a chunky 21-point increase to weapon strength, bringing it up to 96 poison damage. Lost my view there. In addition to that, they get a chunky 20% physical resistance, which only adds to their durability here. I hate that. I was just screaming across the screen somewhere. But this adds to their durability, which they can fire whilst moving, and the biggest boon for these guys is essentially the free cast of Diet Soul Blight that they get in their Drop Rocks of Sundering. They do more damage than normal Drop Rocks, but they also give minus 30 to armor to anything that they hit, sundering that unit and buttering them up for a nice big juicy charge. But you're probably assuming that these guys have a pretty beastly allure, kind of some grand sweeping epic that matches such a cool term like Sentinel. But you'd be wrong, and I'm depressed to tell you so. Pahoax, or the City of Ash, does have a pretty cool story though, so here's an excerpt that gives a nod to a possible presence of the Sentinels as the guardians of the people that are constantly working on the Temple City. Not all the ruins stand empty, however, for some, such as the Temple City of Huatl, are in the process of being refounded. Hundreds of Kroxigor worked to replace stone blocks in alignment, and the jungle has been beaten back. Already the Great Temple has been rebuilt, and its Star Chamber houses a mage priest for the first time in an age. Oixel, the Eternal City, was ruined by demons, but its Great Pyramid is still attended by skink priests, and it is said that the skink of that city have almost mastered the carnivorous flightless birds that roam the surrounding plain. Hahuax, the city of Ash, has been abandoned and refounded no fewer than 6 times. Through it all, the pyramids have stood tall, the weathered but defiant powers of the ancients. Last, but most certainly not least, is the mighty Thunderous One. This ancient stegodon is so absolutely balls out strong, it's disgusting. I personally love it, and it might be my favorite Regiment of Renown that the Lizardmen have to offer. And I unfortunately don't have any cool factoids about the Thunderous One, I'm afraid. You'll have to instead enjoy this awesome drawing from the 8th edition Warhammer Army book. It also inspired this actual map that we're on. I wish I had something cool to go off of, like the temple city that it hails from, or to at least kind of tell you about that, but alas, all I have is one of the cooler pictures from the book. That doesn't mean I don't have anything to say about the mechanics of this monstrous juggernaut of a dinosaur. So, what does 300 points get you? Come on. You know I'm gonna say an increase to melee defense and melee attack, but it's a pretty significant increase. 12 melee defense, bringing it to a grand total of 44 on top of the 140 armor of this thing. Whew. That is nothing to sneeze at. It's one of the most heavily armored things in the game, next to the Rotting Leviathan at 150 and the Empire Steam Tank at 160 armor. In addition to that, you get 200 more range weapon strength on this thing. That's devastating. The devastating blowguns that do poison damage here. That's 898, let's just say 900 total weapon strength, firing downrange at a range of 115 as this massive beast of war goes plowing through shit. And this doesn't seem like a massive increase over the original Ancient Stegodon, but you can take both the Thunderous One and a Red Crested Skink on an Ancient Stegodon for only 500 points more than a non-Lord Ancient Stegi for a devastating combination. Your opponent is going to focus all their resources into shutting down one of the Ancient Stegodons at a time, while the other rampages through the countryside, slapping peasants and taking wheat. The big standard ability of the Thunderous One is the Judgment of Chakax, the Judgment of Uxmak, the lightning ability that rips into things around the monster, recharging in battle and going off again and again. With only a 15-second recycle, as long as it stays in combat, this monster can just chunk apart large swaths of an army that it engages in melee. Honestly, it's really my favorite unit of the lot, and I'm just absolutely stoked to see this in the game. With that, we are at the end of our lore breakdown and unit analysis of not just the Lizardmen, but both of the new set of units coming with the DLC. And I couldn't be more stoked for how the meta will be shifting with these two races. For a long time, the Lizardmen struggled with a number of big weaknesses in their builds. Access to range anti-large units, aerial superiority, and really vanguard and cavalry. These new units and Regiment of Renown kind of help answer those weaknesses, while also reaffirming what makes Lizardmen so strong. Big, terrifying dinosaurs. The Thunderous One is going to just call down every single Metallica album from the 80s on his foe, while the Ripperdactyls turn things into shredded pork with their magic bullet-like jaws. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and got a better idea of the origins of some of these new units. One more day and we can all enjoy this stuff together, but in the meantime, guys, have a good one and take care.